That was the day they invited me into the club, and then once I got into the club, they said, we need to go down into the basement. Okay, so that's not a good day for an FBI agent.
No, that's not where you want to go.
February 24th, 2010. In a scene worthy of a crime thriller, we have a man claiming to be a Sicilian drug smuggler wearing a flashy purple velour bathrobe on the balcony of a 30th floor luxury condo. This would be his first meeting with the high ranks of the dangerous Sinaloa cartel. Michael McGowan is an undercover agent who spent 2 years in a Mexican cartel. September 23, 1983. Michael McGowan began his career as a uniformed police officer when he joined the Burlington PD, and he grew up in Massachusetts wanting to be a cop, but ultimately would become one in Vermont, and after a couple of years he was promoted to detective. His rapid ascent in the force and his fame as a fierce cop made him think that he'd stay in this job for his whole life. But after meeting several FBI agents who assisted him in some bank robbery investigation, he became interested in the Bureau's higher pay rate. So he changed his career path at 29 years old. February 5th, 1987. Michael received a letter from the FBI appointing him a special agent with the Bureau. 4 days later, he's sworn in at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. So he goes from local police officer in Haverhill, Massachusetts, to an undercover work specialist dealing with world-class criminal organizations. So with no formal undercover training, the agency throws him on this mission to infiltrate a Philadelphia drug trafficking mob. As a new special agent, McGowan quickly proves himself resourceful by creating a front that built vehicles with hidden compartments for drug traffickers. His idea and subsequent operation would lead to numerous arrests, and he seized heroin with a street value of $180 million. That operation was his first big win, paving his way to becoming a star agent. So the Bureau, seeing his enormous potential, assigned him to infiltrate the Italian mafia, and his only help would be from a former mob captain turned informant. This would be his first big-time mafia case. During his following 30-year career as an undercover agent, McGowan successfully infiltrated 3 times the Italian mafia, the Russian mafia, the Outlaws Biker Club, and the Sinaloa cartel, as well as several other operations regarding any drug trafficking or murder for hire. One of his earliest successes would be the arrest of Carmen D'Annunzio, Boston's mafia underboss, in this 6-month operation where he was posing as a corrupt state official. Michael quickly showed that he could blend in easily to any situation and could spend months studying all the details of a case to become the best man for the job.
When I first started working undercover, I was very bad at it, as you can tell. And then you improve as you work, because I became hooked on the technique.
Now, Michael's record wasn't perfect. He had made a rookie mistake back when infiltrating the Boston mob, and his cover was nearly blown. He was appointed to meet this mafia boss in a building where he couldn't count on any backup. And when he went inside, without any guarantees on his well-being, thinking maybe they would kill him, he just got lucky and found a friendly mobster ready to trust him with more dirty details. What could have been a life-threatening situation ultimately led to the arrest of mob boss Bobby Luisi Jr. in 1999. In this other case, with another dreadful mistake, he fully blew an operation to catch a serial killer by accidentally butt-dialing the killer's phone. The man was never caught after that. Nevertheless, his ability to become one with the criminal underworld in all its colors and sizes had made him a legend within the FBI. But one of his most impressive jobs was his undercover assignment to the Operation Dark Water, which aimed to infiltrate the Sinaloa cartel led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Lora.
And I remember clearly to this day that the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, because to have an opportunity in 2009 to take a run at Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel was unheard of.
Early 2009, Michael had been running the FBI's national undercover team called the National Dedicated Undercover Response Element, ENDURE, when he stumbled upon this case. Now, in his book, Ghost, 30 Years as an FBI Undercover Agent, he recalls how most high-stakes operations of his career began almost casually, when one of his agents was briefing him on a seemingly trivial detail, and mentioned a criminal organization that immediately got his attention.
I've been half listening while leafing through some Ender paperwork, but upon hearing the words Sinaloa Drug Cartel, when my agent told me his informant was a 2-time convicted federal drug dealer with ties to the organization, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. 22 years on the job. I knew a good case when I heard one. He had my full attention. In 2009, the Mexican Sinaloa Drug Cartel was the most powerful criminal drug organization in the world.
FBI agent Hank Tanner had a good potential lead. A 2-time convicted federal drug trafficker called Gustavo Gus Vargas, who was flaunting his alleged ties to the Sinaloa cartel and was offering to cooperate with the FBI. Vargas, aka the General, would cooperate if the FBI helped him recover some personal property seized by the US government because it had sentimental value for him. McGowan couldn't care less about this criminal's feelings, but was happy to give the man what he wanted if the FBI could use him to infiltrate the cartel. At this point, the Sinaloa cartel was the most powerful on the planet, according to the US Justice Department. They were founded back in 1987 in the Mexican state of Sinaloa, and official estimations pointed to over 200 tons of cocaine and heroin smuggled into the US, as well as massive quantities of marijuana, MDMA, and methamphetamine. McGowan realized that it was a long shot to infiltrate this behemoth of a criminal organization, but he just couldn't let the opportunity pass him by.
I didn't have the heart to tell Tanner that the odds of making a case against the Sinaloa cartel and Chapo Guzman from our Boston office were astronomically low.
The odds were against their Boston office. Boston wasn't a significant hub for drug supply or distribution, so they had to create a believable scenario somewhere else. Building a case against the world's biggest drug cartel in the world and its infamous leader, Chapo, wasn't gonna be easy. The feds couldn't operate in Mexico, and they couldn't rely on the Mexican government, so they needed to trust an unpredictable informant. On the other hand, McGowan needed to clear an important bureaucratic obstacle. Endorse used to stay away from drug cases and didn't consider them a priority. But as operational supervisory team leader, he could try to make the case for an exception and assign their best undercover agents if it meant the FBI could go against El Chapo and his cartel. So Michael goes to FBI HQ to formally request permission to take on this unprecedented drug case that would require considerable time and resources. To his amazement, his request to pit Endorse against the Sinaloa cartel was approved, and Operation Darkwater was officially greenlit with a $500,000 budget.
I would only speak to them in English and directly, not on the phone. All right, but I told them from the beginning I only spoke English because I didn't want them to bring an Italian speaker to the meetings. And I had Spanish-speaking agents with me, and the majority of the conversations took place in Spanish.
February 24th, 2010, Agent Tanner sets up a meeting between Gus Vargas, McGowan, and other agents posing as henchmen with convincing aliases like Gonzo, Antonio, and Patricio. The plan was pretty bold. McGowan was supposed to impersonate an old Sicilian mobster known as El Viejo, the Old Man, and meet Vargas, who would later connect him to Jesus Manuel Gutierrez Guzman, El Chapo's cousin. So they meet in this luxury 30-story oceanfront Florida condo rented out by the FBI. They had to go big if they wanted to impress him and get to El Chapo. But there was a major issue. McGowan couldn't speak Italian, so he had to create a whole persona with a specific demeanor and follow a very specific set of steps if he wanted to fool the middleman. McGowan's colleagues dress casually in jeans and t-shirts, but he deliberately wears this nice suit and positions himself to the side of the room as a silent observer. He remains quiet throughout the entire meeting, posing as this untouchable type mobster, with his behavior designed to unnerve Vargas, which it clearly did. He never interacted with Vargas, leaving him frustrated but absolutely convinced of his performance.
Who's that asshole in the suit?
Vargas asked Tanner. The reaction was perfect. They're messing with egos that they're used to encountering from informants while also gauging his personality and creating a profile on this guy that they're depending on. Vargas counted 2 prior arrests and 17 years spent in federal prison, but he saw himself as the smartest person in any room and acted as a major player in the drug underworld. Still, McGowan knew he had him.
Our informant, Gus Vargas, stood ready to make the introductions. It was game time.
McGowan decided to take on another undercover assignment, so his persona was perfected before meeting Jesus Manuel Gutierrez Guzman. He created El Viejo. He was a 50-something-year-old Sicilian thug with graying hair and a no-bullshit demeanor. El Viejo couldn't speak Sicilian, Italian, or even Spanish, so he wouldn't directly talk to Guzman. This European kingpin would be the kind of mobster who only dealt through intermediaries with little regard for anyone's opinion. More importantly, this character would seem to struggle with English, so he would only speak in drug deals and money. He would also skip any mention of the U.S. to avoid any suspicion from the Mexicans. If they knew they had something to do with the U.S., red flags would raise.
If he knew that we were doing anything in the United States, he wouldn't have had anything to do with us. We presented ourselves as we were looking for a cocaine market in Europe, and he was looking for that opportunity at the same time.
Jesus Guzman was the first to channel El Chapo. Now, they first met at the same luxurious apartment where McGowan carefully staged all the details to project this image of wealth and criminal influence. While the Mexican drug trafficker wears this suit, Michael decides at the last minute to change his attire to this flashy purple velour bathrobe that gave him this cigar-smoking silver fox look, who was more interested in luxury and enjoying life than in dealing with this middleman. For a final touch, they would pick the high-floor condo to exploit a known vulnerability in Gutierrez Guzman. He was afraid of heights. The Mexican narco was visibly nervous and huddled away from the balcony ledge where El Viejo shook his hand. The fake henchman calmed him down and took him inside, where the feds had strategically placed a lot of cameras. El Viejo never cared to take part in the details of the trafficking operation. He just remained cool and absent-minded, taking care of a fake date he was having with an attractive FBI agent posing as his lady. He just let his lackeys carry information back and forth. He was too high in the Sicilian chain of command to talk to anybody who wasn't El Chapo himself. This charade lasted for the next 3 hours, in which they casually set up the details about transporting cocaine from Mexico to Europe, as if it were nothing to him.
We also knew he wasn't coming out, obviously, so we had to deal with what I called his executive board, his attorneys, his financial people.
They were playing in the same field as big names in the drug business, such as Rafael Zelaya Valenzuela and Sergio Lopez Alarcón, so they needed to tread lightly on the deal's conditions. The way they designed the Sicilians' involvement in the deal guaranteed they only needed to manage the details and wait for the actual shipping and handling to reduce further involvement of any big-time players. The undercover team would manage the local distribution once the drugs were in Europe. That was the perfect way to avoid asking the cartel for large amounts of money up front. Gutierrez Guzman takes the bait and brags about the Sinaloa cartel having the capacity to transport up to 20 tons of cocaine via cargo containers, and many other inventive methods.
Si, senor. El Chapo, he has the means, submarines, airplanes, trucks, boats.
However, McGowan didn't show too eager to move that much product in a first deal to avoid suspicions, so his undercover agents proposed starting with a shipment of 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms. They know that these pros rarely execute multi-ton deals on their first encounter. Had they accepted such a massive initial shipment, they would have likely never heard from the cartel again, or worse, they could have been killed. McGowan kept this act on for several hours, with his men delving into details regarding price structures, product quality, and international distribution routes, as he deliberately remained in the background, listening intently but saying little, prompting Patricio, an undercover agent fluent in Spanish, to clarify things for him and explain crucial technical details about European port operations. This guy managed to maintain his holier-than-thou attitude to make the point that he was a top dealer who couldn't be bothered with insignificant details. In the end, he goes as far as to relay a message to his equal.
El Viejo has cojones. Tell that to fucking Chapo.
they established the basic framework for a Mexican-European drug deal. McGowan recalls in his book how after hours of tense acting, exhausted, he finally fell into a deep sleep when El Chapo's man left the building en route to the Sinaloa Mountains. They had to wait for weeks in total radio silence, but Vargas received word in April that El Chapo himself wanted to arrange a meeting with El Viejo. The operation was now a top priority for Endure. June 10, 2010. Gutierrez Guzman reappeared and called Vargas in Boston to arrange another meeting between the cartel and the Italians. This time they wanted to meet in the Virgin Islands. During the conversation, Gutierrez Guzman said,
"I'm going to give you to my cousin."
El Chapo Guzman was on the line. Vargas instantly recognized his voice and his brief and direct style.
"Say hello to your boss over there. Say hello to El Viejo."
The Endure team only had a week for that meeting and had to make sure to make El Viejo look wealthy and powerful. So this time they traveled to the U.S. Virgin Islands and rent just the exact kind of multi-million-dollar mansion on a cliff overlooking the ocean that only a Sicilian drug smuggler would have.
And then we started exchanging written messages on pesos. So that was my communication method, but we knew we were not going to have a face-to-face with Chapo.
7 days later, Gutierrez Guzman arrives accompanied by a younger man named Rodolfo Alarcón Mendoza, who claimed to be El Chapo's personal representative. El Chapo didn't show up, but this was a significant positive sign, because over the next 2 days, June 18th and 19th, the discussions became more detailed, covering the quantities of cocaine to be exported, the complexities of international transportation routes and methods, port locations, and emergency contingency plans. As representatives of the Sicilian Mafia, they agreed to a price of $2,800 per kilogram of cocaine, an exceptionally low price but not unusual for bulk purchases directly from a Mexican cartel. Would that product hit U.S. streets, it'd likely reach $20,000 to $25,000 per kilo. They could aim for similar prices in the European market as well. 2 months later, in August 2010, they were introduced to 2 more members of the Sinaloa cartel in this meeting taking place at the original oceanfront Florida condo. Now we have Rafael Celaya Valenzuela and Sergio Lopez Alarcón. These Sinaloans are looking well-dressed and polite, more like the executive board of a major corporation than a stereotypical drug trafficker. It was a nice development for the case. The more high-ranking cartel members they could implicate, the better. Celaya presents himself as an attorney and financial planner, while Alarcón claims to be an accountant. They arrive with Manuel Gutierrez Guzman and Rodolfo Alarcón Mendoza to discuss the financial aspects of the drug deal. Now, McGowan, playing El Viejo, was supposed to maintain his facade of power and authority, so the Mexicans could feel they were dealing with this big fish. He would delegate minor negotiations through his 3 henchmen, expert undercover agents whose exceptional skills allowed for carefully designed appearances at crucial points in the discussion, all without ever having a single fluid conversation with any of his associates. McGowan recalls how, beyond the demanding preparation for each meeting, there was a mountain of FBI reports and paperwork to be completed by the team. But moving a ton of cocaine halfway across the world isn't like going to the supermarket. The case was moving at a painstakingly slow rate. They just needed to be patient and a bit lucky. By early 2011, 2 years into Operation Darkwater, the focus shifted to the European side of the operation, as the team now begins to collaborate with the Spanish National Police, or SNP. The SNP controls an airstrip outside of Madrid, which was a key element in their plan. They needed to create a strong impression on the Sinaloans, so they planned to show them how they had the local police in their pockets. In March, the Sinaloans met the fake Sicilians in Madrid, and El Viejo took Gutierrez Guzman to inspect the airstrip. The drug kingpins were received by lots of SNP officials in full-dress uniforms, standing rigidly at attention, ready to obey El Viejo. Even after that surprising display of power, the team faced unexpected delays as they patiently awaited the first shipment in the summer of 2011. They tried to make friends with El Chapo and offered him a way out of Mexico, but his drug shipments were being seized all across South America, which caused the cartel to become cautious and temporarily seize communication. August 1st, 2011. A ship transporting a container allegedly loaded with 1,000 kilos of cocaine had left Ecuador. They expected it to reach Spain around August 19th. The team's morale shifted from defeat to excitement as Gutierrez Guzman and Celaya Valenzuela arrive in Boston bearing this news. But the following day, after a series of calls to Mexico, the two cartel members disclosed that the container held no cocaine. It was just a test shipment meant to gauge whether it could evade Spanish customs unnoticed. McGowan understood that these guys were expert traffickers. If he rushes things, the whole case could crumble. So they continue following the Sinaloan ways.
2011, we began to exchange what's called test loads with the Sinaloa cartel. They would send vessels from Mexico to Europe. No drugs would be on those vessels.
2 more test shipments followed, one filled with plantains, the other with pineapples. Tracking these from South America to Spain became a logistical ordeal for their agents, and the team was getting frustrated. They'd gathered enough evidence to charge 5 cartel members, including El Chapo, with conspiracy, but they needed to confiscate actual narcotics if they want to look good in court. They couldn't go against the Sinaloa cartel without concrete evidence. They couldn't get their hands on a multi-ton shipment, but the actual turning point came in a smaller package. 2 undercover agents met a cartel contact who handed them a bag containing samples for their European associates. Now, the agents drove to a nearby hotel where Tanner, McGowan, and the other Boston agents unwrapped the plastic, which revealed 9 individually packaged parcels with 1.76 kilos or 3.9 pounds of crystal meth and 3.56 kilos or 7.85 pounds of heroin. They had them. The case could no longer be deemed a dry conspiracy. Now they're ready to go for more.
As a result of those arrests and subsequent investigation, we were able to charge in the United States Chapo and 8 of his executive board members.
July 27th, 2012. The stage is now set for the main operation. The team is looking to score big. FBI and SNP officials carefully unsealed a container destined for Cristaleria Celta, a Brazilian front company used by the Sinaloa cartel to ship cocaine, at a police facility in Algeciras, Spain. They scored indeed. The container had 346 kilos or 762 pounds of cocaine, wrapped in the form of colorful bricks. Vibrant blue, yellow, and pink plastic seemed to adorn the moment. Again, it wasn't a 20-ton shipment, but it was enough to go after their targets. They were waiting for 3 grueling years, and now in just over a month, they had seized $15 million worth of drugs from the Sinaloa cartel. At this point, they have critical evidence, and they decide to summon the Sinaloa cartel members to Spain for their arrest. They wanted them as far away from Mexico as possible, so future operations couldn't be jeopardized. If any detainee cooperated, they wanted them in Europe, beyond the cartel's grasp. It's time for El Viejo to make his final performance. He meets up with Manuel Gutierrez Guzman fully wired, and meticulously walked him through every detail of the case using his usual setup. Gutierrez Guzman affirms that El Chapo had authorized every step, including the cocaine shipment. By this point, the narcos are used to these exhausting 3-hour meetings with El Viejo, so after hours of going all through these details about the deal, McGowan received a text from the Boston team monitoring the case.
No mas.
They needed more from Gutierrez Guzman. The others had to confess too. So McGowan summons Azueta and Celaya Valenzuela and Jesus Gonzalo Palazuelas Soto, high-ranking henchmen sent by the cartel to Brazil to oversee the initial shipment, to his suite. And again, the hours went by as McGowan reviewed their individual roles in the conspiracy. Then he thanked each man and asked them to wait in the lobby for a celebration.
When we arrested Guzman's executive board, Chapo's main players, there's a video of the last meeting, and the Chapo's cousin comes in to greet me, and I We exchange embraces, and you can see clearly on the video my FBI cufflinks.
S&P officers quietly arrested the four Sinaloans in the lobby. 3 years after starting this case many thought was impossible, the Endure team could finally see four main players from the Sinaloa cartel in cuffs. Not only that, they had lots of evidence to arrest others, including El Chapo himself. If a cartel operative failed to report within 36 hours, their security protocols would get triggered, so they needed to move quickly. Another detainee whose name wasn't disclosed agreed to cooperate with the investigation and ended up giving them much more than they were allowed to chew. The man divulged information implicating top-tier Mexican government corruption. He allegedly knew firsthand that officials not only took cartel bribes, but also facilitated the Spain-bound cocaine shipment, among many others. The team just couldn't predict the outcome of this massive discovery. When the explosive intel reaches the Fed's HQ in Washington, the team is baffled by the immediate order.
Stand down. Pursuing cartel government ties was outside the scope of your original objective.
They were also told to wrap up the undercover operation and return to the U.S. McGowan felt the situation was darker than he ever thought. A federal supervisor with no prior involvement in the case issuing that order. It all smelled bad, but they couldn't do anything about it. So the FBI apparently didn't want to expose Mexican officials involved in this, or maybe someone higher up in the chain of command ordered them to stop. McGowan and the rest of the undercover agents returned to Boston. They would never get answers to these questions. Soon after, the Justice Department indicts El Chapo and 8 other cartel members, making headlines in the New York Times and NBC Nightly News. Spain's extradition process was lengthy and complicated. The team spent more than 2 years prepping evidence against the 4 defendants. 3 of them, including Gutierrez Guzman, pleads guilty, receiving 10 to 20 plus years. Only Celaya Valenzuela opted for trial, despite overwhelming evidence against him. After McGowan's 15-minute cross-examination and 5-day trial, the jury deliberated 5 hours before convicting him on all counts. Celaya was sentenced to 17 years on October 14, 2014, over 5 years after Tanner first approached McGowan. All Darkwater defendants had been caught and convicted except for the most important one. El Viejo still hadn't met El Chapo. McGowan recalls in his book the bittersweet moment in which FBI Director James Comey visited Boston to honor the Darkwater team after Celaya's trial in October 2014. He reluctantly attended, proud of Tanner, the rest of the undercover agents, and their fantastic work. As he approached the podium for his speech before 500 federal personnel, McGowan thought,
"What the fuck does outside of the scope mean?"
But he bit his tongue and stood there in anger, completely silent, and shook Comey's hand. Fucking Comey. January 7th, 2016, McGowan's phone received the most important text of his law enforcement career. He immediately knew that El Chapo had been arrested. He was caught in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, after a fierce gunfight. That's the drug lord's 3rd arrest. And now, thanks to Operation Darkwater, he could be extradited to the U.S.
The man with the towel over his head is believed to be El Chapo, being led by Mexican authorities to an airplane bound for Mexico City. After a massive operation in the town of Los Mochis early this morning, Mexican Marines captured the drug lord.
The extradition was completed in January 2017, with El Chapo facing multiple charges, including money laundering, drug trafficking, and murder. He was ordered to pay $12.6 billion in forfeiture, and today, after a long criminal career, which included 2 successful prison breaks, you can find El Chapo at ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in Colorado, serving a sentence of life plus 30 years.